Once upon a time, about 400 years ago, in a far-off republic called Venice, there lived a woman named Laura Quarini. Laura was born to a noble family, and like most young Venetian noblewomen of her time, she was sent at just 6 years old to live in a convent, San Zaccaria, where her maternal aunt, Suor Onesta, resided. In her own words, quote, "I came to this convent as a little girl during the time of plague, and then I was sent to board at the convent of San Vito until I was accepted as a nun back at this convent. I must have been 15 years old. I took my initial vows, and later I made my profession. But I spoke with my mouth and not with my heart. I have always been tempted by the devil to break my neck." It wasn't until her 40th year that Laura first met the man who would become her lover, Andrea Foscarini. He was not her first friendship with a man. There had been many before, supplied by Donna Cipriana, who, in exchange for financial support, introduced Laura to many men over the years. But, says Laura, I never did anything wicked. That is, I never lost my virginity. Until Foscarini. Again, from her own lips, I fell in love with him and I induced him to love me. I used every means to make him love me, including diabolic methods, that is, spells and superstitious prayers invoking the devils, and I paid Donna Cipriana to provide me with these things. Upon meeting Foscarini, Laura devised a plan to consummate their relationship. With the help of another nun, Conversa Zaccaria, whose name likely reflects the convent where she lived, she wrenched an iron bar from the grill of her cell's window, used it as a crowbar, and, with extreme effort, made a hole in the wall of a small storeroom. It took more than a month to dig through the 6-stone-deep wall, but these women were persistent. To cover their tracks, they placed a large stone across the outside of the convent using terracotta paste to camouflage their deceit. Inside, they filled the interior cavity with lime, and their reward? The arrival of their lovers, Foscarini and his cousin, Zorzi, who was provided for Zaccaria. Quote, "The two men came in a boat and put a plank across. We unblocked the hole, and they entered through it. And they stayed with us for 2 or 3 hours while they had intercourse with us. Eventually, the treachery was discovered, and after interrogation through an iron grill by the head of the Venetian church, Laura confessed in, frankly, excessive detail. She highlighted the sacrilegious nature of her crimes, revealing that the initial consummation took place during Lent, a period designated by the Catholic Church for fasting and abstinence. She then elaborated on later encounters. Quote, "Foscarini concealed himself within the storeroom for 10 or 12 days. Meanwhile, I went around the public spaces of the convent, ensuring that I was seen by the other nuns. And then, when everyone was asleep, I went to be alone with him. And all those nights that he stayed in the nunnery, he had intercourse with me." Predictably, the Catholic Church was horrified by her account. Under threat of torture, she was forced to reveal the name of her lover as well as those of her accomplices, including a serving woman named Antonia and her husband Julian. The punishments were severe. Foscarini and his cousin Zorzi were exiled from Venice for 20 years upon pain of death, while Julian, who had rowed the men to the gaping hole, received either 8 years of hard labor or 8 years imprisonment, as well as the severing of his dominant hand. Lastly, Antonia was flogged from San Marco to the Rialto and told that should she ever be found in a convent again, her nose and ears would be cut off. Rome was appalled, and Venice embarrassed. Drastic measures must be wrought. But what of the two nuns? As members of the convent, Laura and Zaccaria were exempt from secular jurisdiction. Their fates rested with the church. But As these women were already forcibly enclosed within the convent to lead lives of poverty, chastity, and obedience until they died, there was little the church could do. Most likely, they resumed their lives within the confines of San Zaccaria. A punishment, indeed.
Hey y'all, I'm Erica.
And I'm Caroline. And today, we're bringing you another episode of the Pithy Chronicle, History with a Bite.
Our historical retellings are guaranteed to entertain.
We are here to prove that history is just another reality show, except this melodrama is unscripted.
So let's open up the book and jump in. In the time it takes you to drive to work, we promise to fascinate, surprise, and enlighten you.
All you have to do is listen. Are you hungry yet? As a note, before we enclose ourselves within the convent walls, this episode is about a very specific period of history in the city of Venice. It delves into the lives of nuns, some of whom chose to be there for religious devotion, and some of whom did not. It is in no way a discussion of religion, either for or against, and it isn't a comment on the Catholic Church at large. It is a presentation of historical facts with some witty responses thrown in. That is all. Just covering our history-loving asses.
All right, Caroline. That was quite a salacious tale you just recounted.
You're welcome.
I particularly enjoyed Laura's uses of sexual innuendos, even as she's being questioned by the patriarch, the head of the Venetian church. I have so many questions that I don't even know where to start.
She was very brazen, which I love about her, both in her actions and in the retelling of her illicit deeds.
Yeah, and I'm assuming confessing to using spells and devious methods of wooing her lover. I'm sure that's not the norm for nuns at the time.
Not the norm, but not as far off as you might think. Today, we are taking a gondola ride through Renaissance Venice.
Oh my god.
Ugh, the eye roll. I'm gonna wear it with a badge of honor. Gondola ride through Renaissance Venice, which was at the time a massive metropolis and trading hub. The Venetian Republic is legendary for its wealth, opulence, and liberality. Its reputation lasts to this day. Much of the world knows of Venice's legendary Carnival celebrations that take place before the 40-day period of Lent. But the thing we have today, the 10-day affair of masks and costumes, is incredibly tame compared to its historic predecessors. During the Italian Renaissance...
Oh, dates. Are we going to get into this argument?
Oh gosh, I really don't want to do this. Let's just say that today's story is somewhere from the mid-1500s to the mid-1700s.
Okay.
During the Italian Renaissance, Venice Carnival could last from Christmas to the beginning of Lent.
Oh my god.
During those coldest, most uncomfortable months of damp and dark, the Venetian people found other ways to amuse themselves. Some of it was striking pageantry. Fireworks, costumes, masks, fried sweets.
Yes, please.
Yes, please. But the beautiful could easily descend into the brutal. What began as harmless entertainments often fell into debauchery, venomous jokes, abusive courtships, drunken violence.
You know, I'm down for the costumes and the mask. Give me some sparkle and some wow. But I can see how abusive relationships fueled by alcohol could easily ruin a good time.
Fueled by alcohol and anonymity.
And if we've learned anything from the internet, it's how dangerous anonymity can be.
While the bedazzled masks look absolutely stunning, as I know you very much appreciate,
I do.
They also conceal the person beneath. Masks allowed the citizens of Venice to circumvent the rigid social hierarchy of the age. Low-born men could seduce the most noble women or even the most noble men. The whole world could be turned upside down. Criminals could mingle with the saintly, and all this raucous behavior only added to Venice's iffy reputation. And the ruling class, the nobles, were no exception. They were a huge part of this iffiness. Venetian noblewomen lathered themselves in heavy makeup, donned extravagant gowns with precariously low necklines, and I do mean nipular. And, most offensively to the prudishly minded church, they wore high-heeled clogs.
Oh, for shame, the high-heel clogs!
For shame! Indeed, their coiffures were so extensive, it was sometimes hard to distinguish between a noble woman and one of the 20,000 courtesans who walked the streets, also in fabulous heels.
As they should.
As they should. And out of a population of 150,000, that's a lot of activity.
Yeah, that's a strong ratio.
It's a good percentage, yeah. These excesses were then combined with the fact that, as a major trading port bringing exotic goods from the east, the city was also bursting with foreigners, to the point that non-Christians almost outnumbered the Italian Catholics. So, the Catholic state was desperate to prove itself in this lascivious and lurid city. They countered the tolerance and liberality of the Venetians with a desperate piety. Redemptive masses, public processions, and an overabundance of churches, all in an effort to beg God's forgiveness for Venice's wicked ways. This enforced devotion is best seen through the lens of the Venetian nunneries. At its height, Renaissance Venice boasted 50 convents, housing thousands of noblewomen who were either called or driven to the religious life.
Driven. I want to talk about that. Sometimes married couples would just be like, hey, we've had a good run, but I'm going to go chill in the monastery/nunnery to get out of the way of each other. But driven...
Oh.
Yeah, driven sounds different than that.
No, this is like 15-year-olds.
Yeah.
Many, if not honestly most, of these highborn women were placed in the convents by their families out of necessity rather than piety.
Right.
And in no way am I including widows or...
conscious uncouplings.
Thank you, Gwyneth.
So, you're saying the family kind of offered them up as sacrificial lambs for their own wicked ways?
It's a reasonable guess, but no, that's not quite what I mean. While it was definitely good PR to have many of your female relations take the veil, and, of course, they were then able to pray for your salvation.
And that is always useful.
It's always useful, yeah. But while good PR, it was really a financial inevitability. The Venetian marriage market, like its carnival, had gotten out of hand. Ambitious parents were willing to pay astronomical dowries to secure advantageous political or social alliances.
Okay, define astronomical.
Well, more than once, the Venetian government had to step in and set monetary limits because things had spun out of control.
Oh dear.
In 1420, they established 1,600 ducats as the max. By 1505, that law had lost all its weight and a new 3,000 ducat ceiling was put into place. But the inflation just continued. There are documented noble dowries exceeding 20,000 ducats. For comparison, an accomplished mason at this time earned an annual salary of 50 ducats. So that is 400 years of the average Venetian salary.
Oh, okay. That is astronomical.
Super expensive. Yeah, it was ridiculously expensive to marry off one's daughter. Which means most parents had to make a choice.
Oh dear, I don't know that I like where this is going.
One daughter, maybe two for the very wealthy, was destined for marriage, and the others, and they did like to procreate, were not.
Yeah, I don't know that they really had effective contraception, but...
No, that they did. It was called conscious uncoupling.
Okay, so what happened to the other daughters?
Obviously, they couldn't marry below their station.
It would be a catastrophe, obviously.
Yes, gasp. And they couldn't be spinsters, because that's an economic drain and just not a good look for the family.
Gotta look out for the purse strings, never mind your living human child.
But a convent, that's a good plan. They can devote themselves to God, marry Christ, and then make the family look pious.
Oh, Lord.
Exactly.
We all know that Jesus is the best husband after all.
Actually, it gets even more ridiculous. Because only, let's say, 2 out of 5 noble daughters could afford to marry, only 2 out of 5 noble sons were able to find a wife. The rest were then encouraged to take military, political, or commercial careers, and it was very common for these unmarried noblemen to live together in all-male households.
But not the cloth. The women had to become nuns, but the men didn't. They just got to shack up together like Jezebels.
Well, yeah. The priesthood wasn't seen as advantageous to the family, but hardworking men pushing their familial ties into trade and politics was. And I know what you're thinking. In other parts of Italy, being part of the cardinalhood was excellent for the family. Not in Venice. It was different.
I was just going to say, do the men's prayers not get up to God quite as well as the nuns? But, you know.
I think it's more just that they couldn't make their name/fortune as a humble friar.
Well, of course, because money is more important than your immortal soul when there are plenty of women to go around to do the job. But let's circle back here because
Circling back.
These men who are shacked up together, obviously they couldn't just get married or find some bride from somewhere else. I'm assuming this is where the courtesans come into play. The 20,000 of them?
Exactly. Those 20,000 courtesans. And these men and the courtesans all had to pray for forgiveness for their sins that were forced upon them. And so they needed intermediaries with God to help cleanse their wickedness.
And we're back to the nuns.
You have it. It's a vicious cycle. These forced vocations were an accepted fact of the Venetian Renaissance. Parents would usually choose their loveliest, most accomplished daughters for matrimony, and those women who were viewed as less desirable were given over to God.
Well, I bet that went over well with the Almighty.
Oh, phew. While the convent did require a small dowry, it was tiny in comparison, and in return, the women received an honorable and secure home until they died.
I feel like you're really lowballing Jesus right now.
Jesus had nothing to do with it.
Let me rephrase. I think the Venetian public is really lowballing Jesus. He gets the homely girls and only a small dowry.
Right?
Thank the Lord he is merciful.
I mean, maybe. We'll see.
We'll see.
Here are some chilling words written by Cassandra Tarabotti, a nun at Sant'Anna Convent who continually wrote against her mistreatment in a diatribe entitled Inferno Monacale, or The Nun's Hell.
Sounds like I could get a beer with this girl.
She is my favorite person I have researched thus far for this podcast. She is an amazingly vibrant source because she is so angry about her situation. She holds nothing back. Erica, would you read us an excerpt?
A girl lies.
Calm down. Erica read the first 4 words and got very concerned.
And everyone will know when I read them. Quote, a girl lies prostrate. Her lips touching the stone floor, a black cloth is thrown over her, and lighted candles are placed at her feet and at her head. Up above her, the litanies are being sung. All the signs suggest that she is dead. She is a witness at her own funeral. From within her bier, she accompanies the singing with tears and sobs, sacrificing all her senses to suffering and pain. Unquote.
And that, despite Erica's love of the abundant innuendos, is actually her recounting of her initiate ceremony. But I do really like where you thought that was going.
I did!
Like thousands of others, she spoke her vows, as Laura Querini said, with her mouth, not her heart. Once taken, these vows were irrevocable, and when a girl walked through the heavy doors of a nunnery, she was never again to see the outside world.
So, did the church know that this was the case Surely they didn't want unwilling young women? Not only does it defeat the spiritual purpose, but it also leads to rebellion, like we saw in the beginning?
Yeah, and the church was painfully aware. Officially, the Catholic Church was absolutely against forced vocations. As you say, using the convents as dumping grounds for the unmarried or unmarriable noblewomen doesn't seem very pious or sincere. They unequivocally condemned any person who forced a woman to enter a nunnery. But there was also a recognition that it was a necessary evil. In the words of Patriarch Giovanni Tiepolo, quote, "If the 2,000 or more noble women who in this city live locked up in convents as if in a public storehouse had been able or had wanted to dispose of themselves differently, what confusion, what damage, what disorder, what scandals, and what terrible consequences would be witnessed for their families and for the city."
So the head of the Venetian church felt the city would fall into chaos if families weren't allowed to use the convents as public storehouses for their unmarried ladies.
Indeed he did. His words. By the 16th century, the system was so entrenched that no one really knew how to stop it. Instead, they put up tall, thick walls and hid the women away. They tried to completely isolate the nuns from the secular world in hopes that even if their devotion wasn't heartfelt, it was still permanent.
Well, this is the epitome of out of sight, out of mind, and it is the grossest thing I have heard in a long time.
Yes. But that said, it's not like these women were dragged to the convents kicking and screaming. Venice, despite its reputation, was still a very devout city, and likely many of the girls accepted their fate even if they didn't feel called to it. And their families certainly tried to make things sound more appealing. It was common, as we heard with Laura Quarini, to place very young girls into a convent as a type of boarding school, ensuring that the young ladies who were expected to take the veil had very little exposure to the outside world.
So they wouldn't know what they were missing out on.
And families usually chose to patronize 1 or 2 convents. Thus, all their noble women would be together and have familial ties. Sisters, aunts, cousins, they got the whole gang. The more cynical, including our angry diarist Tarabotti, felt, quote, "All men are liars in all circumstances. But when it comes to assassinating a miserable girl, their deceptions and falsehoods are greater than ever."
Fighting. I love her. Honorary chronicler. I love it.
Honestly, we are the honoraries in comparison to her. She is the epitome.
She's been doing this a lot longer than we have, but
she actually has published 2 pamphlets. She was pissed.
Getting back to the story. What were these deceptions that these men were telling them? Because I feel like this is going to get really crazy really fast.
Their deceptions came in all shapes and sizes. As they do.
You're welcome.
Curve to the left. Okay. I'm fanning myself. Male family members relied upon the already initiated nuns of the family to convince their nieces and sisters to accept their fate with enticements. One source I found claimed that elderly nuns would avenge their own forced vocations by, quote, weaving the most fabulous yarns undreamt of by even the most famous and gifted of poets. For example, nuns would adorn the convent courtyard trees with sugared fruits and almonds, conning their young charges into believing that the gardens of nunneries grew such delights.
This really feels like a minivan and some stranger being like, "Hey kid, you want some candy?"
Honestly, my sweet tooth is strong enough that I might think about it.
No.
I know.
I like things and material luxuries much more than I do.
Oh, sweetheart. No. While the young novitiate would take vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, they were encouraged to believe the reality would be somewhat different, as in fact it was. Most families furnished their daughters or sisters with sizable allowances, with which they could purchase necessities.
Necessities as food, clothing, family jewels.
And yes, And yes.
Oh!
These highborn ladies were definitely in want of food, especially luxurious sweets and expensive cuts of meat. They also needed the latest fashions of heavily bejeweled bodices and expensive shimmering silks. And of course, their sparse cells, because every nun did have her own out of modesty. They needed some spiffing up. Curtains of velvet here, a polished mahogany bed over there. After all, they needed to entertain their kinswomen in style when they hosted little get-togethers within the confines of the convent.
I can't blame them. If you're gonna forcibly send me somewhere, can I at least have my standard of living, please and thank you?
That's exactly what was happening. Yes.
And so this is all guilt money. I'm gonna buy you this toy, but there's no complaining.
It is a parenting strategy of the ages. Not that I would ever do such a thing.
Glad to know I'm doing this right. So did all the nuns enjoy these luxurious surroundings?
Well, no, not all. And outside of Venice, there were likely very few. Again, this is a Venetian anomaly. It was a special deal that they had with the church to overlook some vanities and disobedience in acknowledgement that, perhaps, these young women weren't really thrilled to be there.
What? Shock.
I know. Let's take a quick tour of a Venetian convent to acquaint ourselves with their day-to-day existence.
As long as you promise the gates won't slam shut behind me.
Women who entered the religious life were to be shielded from view, even within the confines of the church. Nuns attended Mass from the choir, where they sat out of sight of the public. A tall wall physically secluded them from the rest of the congregation. At head height, there were a series of tiny little windows with wrought iron gates shrouded with thick curtains. I mean, really, no looking, no peeking. And in the far corner, nuns would line up to receive the sacraments from a priest through a veiled and grated opening. So like a little hand would kind of squeak in there and pass you the wafer and then pull back out.
That is depressing and also really, really creepy. Take this mystery thing from this mystery hand.
And we are not done. Their seclusion wasn't limited to the church's sanctuary. Concrete mechanisms ensured the nuns were always secluded and isolated. Functionally and symbolically, the convent's architecture screamed, "Keep out, don't touch, no." Blind windows, concealed corridors, forbidding walls, all designed to keep a nun hidden and secluded. And while every nun did have their own cell, and yes, that is what they called them.
Well, that's telling.
They were encouraged to be uniform in dress, action, and piety.
Except those bodices and the shimmering silks.
Oh, those were hidden underneath the habits. Get with the program. Come on. A Renaissance nun was expected to love all her sisters equally, to eat from a common table, to wear garments of the convent store, to work pleasantly alongside her fellow sisters, and to participate in communal acts of worship. Because while the patriarchy couldn't control their emotions or spiritual devotion, by golly, they could control almost everything else.
Yeah, man, I'm super not here for this. It sounds so miserable. No, thank you.
And most of the nuns were
you.
just as displeased. As we've already covered, many of the stricter regulations were flouted, thus the bejeweled bodices, due to the unusual circumstances of the time. While nuns were generally meant to eschew their former lives and stifle their individuality, Venetian convents often looked the other way. After all, from the abbess down to the newly initiated, most of the women were obligated to take the veil, and thus some leniency was anticipated, at least by the nuns themselves.
But not by the church.
Yeah, maybe not. I mean, the patriarch was evidently cool with it, but the pope was a no-go.
But what he can't see!
What he doesn't know won't hurt him! Ha ha! These women, many of whom came from the highest ranks of Venetian society, grew up in the lap of luxury with every advantage imaginable, and thus they found it difficult to conform. Many continued to assert their individuality in willful opposition to a common life. A hilarious example that I found revolves around chickens.
What? Like, what kind of black story is this?
Upon a visit to a Venetian convent, a prelate, which was a high-ranking Catholic official not from Venice, was surprised to find chickens just wandering about. And not just within the gardens or outside by the chicken coops, which would have been pretty common considering feeding all of those women would necessitate a lot of eggs, because these ladies really liked their cakes.
Women after my own heart.
As I said, sweet tooth overload. But the chickens were everywhere, clucking inside the convent halls and pooping in the stairwells.
Oh, no ma'am. Mm-mm. That is completely unhygienic.
Yes.
Nope.
The prelate thought so too. He was also confused as to why nuns had nesting chickens in their individual cells.
I'm afraid to ask.
He discovered that the chickens were akin to pets. They belonged to individual nuns.
Weird, but why is that bad?
A few reasons, actually. First, chickens lay eggs. Duh. And all food was to be consumed communally, so you were not allowed to keep eggs for yourself, either to eat or to sell for profit. Second, pets of any kind denoted ownership, which was a big no-no, strictly forbidden.
Because the gowns. You know,
yeah. As I said, this dude was not from Venice, and he was like, what the heck is going on here? Nuns were supposed to give up all their worldly possessions, including pet chickens. While funny to our ears today, the issue of chicken ownership encapsulated the ongoing struggle between individuality and community.
You know, I'm seeing the chicken and the egg dilemma in a whole new light now.
Oh yeah. And the same push and pull arose with the nuns' appearance. Rules dictated modest dress and somber uniformity. No bright colors, no fine fabrics, shoulders covered, definitely no cleavage. Hair was to be cropped short, as luxurious locks were a source of great vanity for Venetian women. And even the baby hairs that framed the face were to be strictly hidden from view with abundant veils. And, most importantly, absolutely no high heels.
Oh no, it couldn't be me.
No.
It could not be me.
No. But as we've said, the noble women were led to believe that these rules didn't necessarily apply to them.
So who do they apply to then?
Oh, that's an excellent question. Up until now, we have discussed nuns as an equal community of women, which was what they were supposed to be, but that wasn't really the case. There were two different types of nuns, the monache da coro and the conversa. The noble women were called choir nuns, the monache da coro. They brought money to the convent through their dowries and were eligible to hold offices within the chapter. The choir nuns made up the governing body and were required to attend all services. But as their devotion was enacted through rigorous piety...
Okay.
I know, eye roll, please. As their devotion was enacted through rigorous piety and prayer, they were exempt from the mundane duties of convent life. Those were left to the conversa, or the lay sisters.
If I had to pick, I would want to be them, and definitely not the conversa.
I think it's a fair statement to say that, yeah. The conversa were usually from a lower social status and didn't bring in the same level of dowry. But that's not to say they didn't bring in any dowry, just a lot less.
And because they didn't provide the convent with monetary support, they provided...
menial labor. Exactly. The technical difference between the two was actually based on the vows that they took.
Okay.
But the reality was a social difference. And of course, it was a powerful distinction. The conversa couldn't hold office and were expected to behave as less than the choir nuns.
Oh yes, that sounds familiar.
And it gets worse.
Of course it does. It always does.
It always does. It's history. Despite their vows of poverty and obedience, the choir nuns often employed the conversa as their personal servants.
That really doesn't sound in line with their vows.
No.
If they can't have a chicken, why in hell can they have another person?
There you go! Yes, if you can't own a chicken, you can't employ a person. The conversa were the ones responsible for the cleaning, the cooking, the gardening, anything other than the regular devotional obligations of the nuns. But, to clarify, that was no small matter. Nuns began their day in the middle of the night for the matins service. Their devotional prayers continued every 2 to 3 hours until bedtime, which then again wasn't really bedtime because they woke up 2 to 3 hours later for matins. Choir nuns were required to attend all of these, and merely speaking the words didn't count. they were told their prayers must be accompanied by, quote, a devotion of the heart, as well as a physical piety. Stand, sit, face front, kneel, incline head, and make every reverent gesture according to the correct procedure and due order of the office.
It sounds almost worse than having a newborn.
It sounds actually pretty similar with that 2 to 3 hours.
Yes. Thank you, 4 months sleep regression.
Oh no, I'm so sorry.
Oh, yes.
It was physically exhausting, something you might know a little bit about.
Just a little.
To the point that at some time in the 17th century, the requirements were loosened so that nuns could have an uninterrupted night of sleep, as their physical health was actually suffering.
I can only hope for the same mercy.
Yes. Any day now. Any day now. But even with this little bit of extra sleep, they were still encouraged to perform penitential activity to, quote, render the spirit more ready for devotion by mortifying the flesh. Fasting and whipping themselves were crucial, according to the Venetian patriarch Priuli, as was the morning ritual of, quote, flinging themselves onto their knees as soon as they got out of bed to thank God for having preserved them from the devil throughout the night.
This is extreme.
And probably pretty boring. Most of these women were not called to this life, and there they were, forced to have a monotonous life of prayer, fasting, whipping, and kneeling. It would definitely wear on you.
Not to mention their bitterness against their fate.
Back to Tarabotti. Girl was bitter.
Listen, how pissed must you be at your parents?
She was very pissed. There are some quotes. We're getting there.
Yes!
She basically condemns them.
Nice.
Some nuns turned their hobbies, such as sewing and embroidery, into personal profit because, more jewels. Some used the hierarchical system of the convent to lead powerful lives. While many mourned the loss of a familial life, others did find the separation from domesticity freeing. It is a common feminist viewpoint that the life of a nun provided female independence. They could wield political and financial power. Choir nuns often acted on the convent's behalf as landowners, employers, and administrators, fields completely unavailable to a married lady.
I certainly think that's the viewpoint women like Heloise took, while perhaps frustrated at her vow of celibacy.
Although that could easily be fixed with a large gaping hole in the wall.
And I think Abelard would have been just fine with that.
I think Abelard would have rowed himself to shore, if you know what I mean.
Oh no. Anyway, I do think she enjoyed the freedom of the nunnery to pursue her own passions and be her own person without a man, especially one like Abelard, ruling over her.
I am sure that Renaissance Venice did have some Heloises of its own. But as we've covered in her episode, she was truly one of a kind. So it's likely that her feelings didn't apply to the majority of these women.
And I really can't argue with that.
No, most of them probably didn't want to be whores instead of wives.
Indeed.
Her words, not mine. While there were certainly some Venetian nuns who felt called to their marriage with Christ, and there were others who chose the vocation as a way to free themselves of men, either politically or sexually. And yes, I am subtly saying that there were likely nuns who preferred the company of other women, which was obviously much easier from within the convent walls that you were not allowed to leave.
What?
While there must have been some, I think that the Venetian marriage market and its massive inflation led to a majority of the nuns feeling more like prisoners than feminists.
The fact that we're using the term inflation to talk about a marriage market in the Renaissance.
Yeah. And I do claim all of this with a lot of evidentiary support. There is, in fact, a plaque that survives near the convent Le Vergini, which is one of the oldest and grandest nunneries in Venice.
Meaning their ranks were filled with noble women from the peak of society.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Influential nuns. Who knew?
Who knew?
And also meaning that they most likely had even more leniency in their prescribed devotions. And fittingly, the plaque reads, quote, "Hope and love keep us in this pleasant prison."
That is a hugely depressing paradox.
Yeah, and it's written. Welcome to our convent. It's a prison, but we like it here.
But we're here, and we're gonna make the most of it.
But our daddies give us extra money out of guilt.
Exactly, you put me here. It's a prison.
If you take off my outfit, there's a bejeweled bodice underneath. La-di-da.
Ooh, la-di-da.
So while some nuns are viewed as empowered feminists, I think it's clear that others felt they were serving a life sentence in a pleasant prison.
I can only assume it was a very personal preference, but for those that truly didn't want to be there, it couldn't have been fun. I'd be miserable.
Yeah, couldn't be me.
I've got to go back to Laura being like, I wanted to break my own neck.
I'd like to go back to Elena Tarabotti. Her biting words really hit home when she says, quote, "With what execrable paternal cruelty do parents consign their daughters to live in a nunnery, even before they are born? Bears, tigers, vipers, basilisks, and every crude poisonous and untamed beast feed and tenderly love their offspring, making no distinction between male and female. Just consider for a moment, O ministers of Satan, that by forcing your daughters to enter convents, you are participants in all their scandalous deeds."
Oh, ministers of Satan? Yes!
Mic drop!
This woman is phenomenal!
She's kicking ass and taking names.
Heck yes, she
There's
is.
also the famous poet Giovanni Boccaccio, who agrees in his renowned work, The Decameron. Erica, would you do the honors?
Boccaccio aggressively mocked the naive men and women who are, quote, so stupid as to believe that when the white veil is placed on a girl's head and her body covered in a black habit, she is no longer a woman and does not feel the feminine appetites, as if in becoming a nun, she has been turned into stone. And if, by chance, they hear anything to confound their belief, they are greatly shocked, as if a great and terrible evil has been committed against nature, unquote. Pointed, accurate.
Sexuality will out. And no habit or wimple will instantly change a woman's desires.
Yeah, I bet not.
He was not allowing this protect the women false modesty to get in the way.
And good for him.
And he does demonstrate this in the tale of Masetto da Lamporecchio, a man who pretended to be deaf and dumb to take a job as a gardener in a convent. The nuns, believing he could not speak of their ill behavior, go on to enjoy numerous and repeated orgies with him, not at all to his regret. And Erica, can you finish us off with another quote?
Oh, yeah, okay. So this is, again, from Boccaccio. The, quote, mad mothers and simple fathers should realize that nuns, too, are made of flesh and bone, and that there is nothing which stimulates desire more than denial. For myself, I die of thirst when there is no wine in the house, unquote. Same. Give me some wine in the house.
G&T, but whatevs. Speaking of which, we do have something exciting coming out next week. Our Bubbles and Bites will be premiering. It is a drink pairing to go with our podcasts for the entire month. So you can sit back, relax, enjoy a little time to yourself without all the stuff, and drink this fabulously tailored cocktail while listening to us and pretend you can't hear your children in the next room. And that, my friends, is that. Please keep your arms and legs inside the gondola until we come to a complete stop. We hope you've enjoyed our ride through Renaissance Venice. Feel free to tip your tour guides with good ratings and reviews. And if you want to help support these historical expeditions, we do have a Patreon account. Any little bit helps keep the puns pithy and the stories spicy. Thanks as always for listening. I'm Caroline.
And I'm Erica. And we are Pithily Yours.
This episode is brought to you by the Pithy Chronicle, LLC. The Pithy Chronicle is intended for education, entertainment, and non-commercial purposes. Any views or opinions expressed in this podcast are personal and do not represent those of people, institutions, or organizations that the owner may or may not be associated with in a professional or personal capacity. While we offer lots of sarcasm, this podcast does not offer any advice or services. Listening to this podcast may induce fits of laughter, unexpected distraction, or uncontrollable rage at the subjects, hopefully not at us. We hope you learned something today. If not, so sorry. Please be advised we are not experts in the following fields: medical, legal, financial, technological, thermonuclear engineering, submarine warfare, neuroscience, or cat husbandry. Thanks for listening to our little disclaimer. Just covering our history-loving asses. Bye!